Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr. Speaker, when this raw, young, enthusiastic but naive country joined with the declaration of war in August 1914, we set in train a series of events that changed the face of this land forever. The statistics do not tell the full and clear story. We know our population was about 1 million people at the time, of whom around 120,000 were to enlist, 59,000 were to be wounded, and of that 59,000, 18,000 were to be killed over the next 4 years. The picture is even more stark when we look at the breakdown of our population at that time. Men between the age of 20 and 45, the fighting age, numbered around 200,000 only. So, over the next 4 years, the majority of that working population of men, and they were mainly men, there were a few hundred women involved, but men went overseas to war, and a significant proportion of them were wounded and killed. Let's fast forward 100 years and put that into today's context. Into today's context, we would be looking at casualties of around 270,000 people. That's the population of Wellington and the Hutt Valley. 81,000 of those in today's figures would have been killed. And I ask this House how we would comprehend and cope with tragedy and destruction of that magnitude, because that is what our forebears 100 years ago had to deal with. It was not just the tragedy of the events of World War I, but the ongoing ripping out of the heart of a generation or more of New Zealand's youth that these events unleashed. And when they sailed in February 1915 with the first NZEF, there was that sense of excitement, of adventure, of duty to the mother country. Though I have to say my forebears, who were staunch Irish Republicans, were not of that bent and did cause some trouble in this country. But generally speaking, this was an adventure to be hailed and embarked upon. And when they landed in Egypt for their training, that sense of mystery and excitement continued. It was only when some of them found their eventual destination was Gallipoli, and even more found that they were headed for the intractable difficulty of the Western Front, that the awful reality of the adventure that they had embarked upon struck home. But over the next 4 years, New Zealand forces, with distinction, with admirable courage, valour and strength, carried out their mission. They were loyal, they were effective, they were united, and they were committed. And they believed very strongly, and their country backed them, that they were doing their duty to make a better world. Mr. Speaker, when they came home, it wasn't the land fit for heroes that Lloyd George promised in Britain. They came home to the outbreak of the Spanish flu and more misery, and a troublesome decade through the 1920s leading to the Great Depression of the 1930s. And it's little wonder that the next generation are captured in that seminal novel by John Mulgan, Man Alone, the essential spirit of the New Zealander fighting against the world. And those images and influences have shaped our heritage today. For the better, I think. We are determined, we are courageous, we are a plucky nation that's prepared to stand up for the things we believe are right. And that's the legacy of those who went away 100 years ago. But sadly, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't the war to end all wars. If anything, it was the war to start the ongoing round of difficulties we still face today. The legacy of unwise decisions of World War I is still felt in the Middle East. We still see it in parts of Europe and the constant attempts to rewrite national boundaries. We still see it in some of the lingering enmities that are abroad. But let not that detract from the courage, the passion or the commitment of those New Zealanders whose sacrifice we see reflected around these walls. They went with the best of intentions. They made a huge sacrifice on behalf of a fledgling nation, and they carried out their duty bravely, courageously and proudly. And Mr. Speaker, if there can be an epitaph for those New Zealanders, it must surely be around those terms. It's appropriate that this Parliament remembers them. It's appropriate that this Parliament draws some courage from their determination. But it's appropriate too to remember that the challenges that they confronted when they went away, in that sort of naive sense of optimism, have not been resolved, are still with us today in a more horrific and more dramatic sense than ever, and challenge New Zealand and all nations to continue to work for peace, to work for freedom, and to work for a world where people actually feel quite good about each other.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I understand it is the government's intention to introduce an impressed supply bill.
Impressed supply, second for 2000.